This is episode 524 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drengmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, in my continued travels around the state of New Mexico, I had an opportunity to visit Carlsbad, speak to the Carlsbad Republican Women's Federation, and had an opportunity to meet with the mayor and some community leaders down there, do a radio interview, and I always enjoy going to see where the money is made in New Mexico.
Yes, so. Lee and Eddy County, which are two counties, Lee and Eddy, when they said it sounds a lot alike, and Eddy County, Carlsbad, that's where a lot of the new action is going. I believe it still produces a lot more oil than Lee County, the historical county in New Mexico, but southeast New Mexico is where it's happening.
Well, according to the Energy Information Administration, this is a relatively new report, Lee and Eddy counties alone are responsible for 29% of all Permian Basin oil production. That is a basin that New Mexico shares with Texas, but really, Lee and Eddy are kind of the majority of the New Mexico section. A lot more Permian Basin acreage, if you will, comes from Texas.
Yeah, I would speculate, having looked at the numbers in the past, not recently, that 95 to 99% of New Mexico's Permian Basin is in those two counties. So
yeah, and Texas counties tend to be a little smaller for starters, and the Texas section has been going for a longer period of time, but the Permian Basin is kind of where it's at in terms of production in the United States, and man, it's just broadly speaking, looking back at 2010, for example, this Energy Information Administration chart, million barrels a day. We're talking just under 1 million barrels a day in 2010 for the entire Permian Basin. That is now over 5, nearly 6 million barrels a day for the entire basin. So, quintuple, nearly sextupled in the span of 13 years for the basin. And now Lee and Eddy alone produce more than the entire basin did, comfortably more, nearly double what the entire Permian Basin did a little over a decade ago. So,
yeah, there was once a time, Paul, when the Permian Basin was looking to be a thing of the past. It was going down, and then all of a sudden, technologies that existed just were perfected. They hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, and then the other issue is, man, they got really good at seismic exploration, and then how to analyze that data and go where the oil is, and formations that they had been drilling through and ignoring for years became the big producers. And it's really a lesson in what is that, the Yogi Berra, or it's like the
it
problem.
Ain't over till
well, no, it's like the problem with predicting the is it's in the future.
There you
go. Something to that level, but. Did they get that one wrong in terms of we will have no more oil in the Permian Basin back in that period? The answer is they really missed that one.
Well, that whole argument, if you will, has been going on since the days of Julian Simon and their battles over whether we would be in a more plentiful world or in a Malthusian world of diminishing economic resources. And Julian Simon, the free marketeer, was absolutely correct in that assessment. And he argued that the greatest resource is the human mind, and he has rarely been proven wrong in that. Real quickly, overall New Mexico oil production, I did the calculations for my presentation down there. We are about 14 times higher in terms of oil production than we were back in 2009. So
Yeah.
that's just mind blowing. And a lot of that is also coming from the Permian Basin as well. One quick note to add, when the whole discussion came up during the last session over gross receipts tax reform, one of the pushbacks that, again, rarely are we on the same side as our beloved leader Michelle Lujan Grisham, but she was right. She endorsed gross receipts tax reform and didn't really do much to push it, but said she supported the concept. Cities like Carlsbad, like Hobbs, Albuquerque, you name it, were some of the leading entities opposed to it. Now, Carlsbad, and I haven't run through exactly how things worked here, but in a 2019 tax bill, HB 6, they shifted the collection of taxes to a destination-based system, which the folks down in Carlsbad say has done a number on their local budgets, and so they kind of feel like they've been picked at in recent years. And even though the amount of money lost by getting rid of the tax pyramiding and the business input taxation on services, that is not a huge number in the grand scheme of things, it impacts them. It impacts them significantly, and they've kind of said, we're sick and tired. We're not going to take it anymore. They really feel like they are losing out on, obviously they send most of their tax revenue to the state from the oil and gas industry, but a lot of the other revenues, including GRT that flows into that community or would otherwise flow into that community, is no longer collected by them. And so the upshot is that this is kind of something I had suspicions and thoughts about, but we're going to be looking for ideas, approaches, ways that we can help these local communities as part of a GRT reform initiative. And the challenge is that it's not really the high priority for the governor and the Democrats, so they're not likely to get too in the weeds and too creative about how to make the local governments like Carlsbad whole. The governor doesn't really have much use for those southeast New Mexico conservative bastions. And how this all works out, I don't know. But, the last time they made a big change to the substantive nature of the gross receipts tax was when Richardson repealed the tax on groceries.
And that set off a cascade
Yes.
of unintended, unforeseen, and disastrous consequences.
Yeah, and it wound up reducing revenues for some cities, boosting them for not just some cities, but some local governments, counties. And I mean, the hold harmless situation, the evolution of that, the elimination of that by Susana Martinez was also very messy and imperfect. And that's the challenge, is that the bang for the buck, the economic benefit associated with doing that kind of swap during with the gross receipts tax is absolutely huge. You're eliminating one of the sins, the original sins of New Mexico tax policy. For the grocery tax, it was of minimal benefit one way or the other. Arguably, it hurt the very people it was supposed to help at the lower income levels, but it really, kind of resulted in a contaminated pool situation where another go at that kind of effort may be viewed much more suspiciously by the leadership of the state of New Mexico. So trying to come up with some creative ideas there.
Yeah, and then Paul, about that location-oriented gross receipts tax, my understanding of this, and I have not studied it a lot, but it's like in the old days. So if I was an engineer, say in Santa Fe engineering a project that went on in Carlsbad would get the gross receipts tax from that. Is that right? But now if I'm in Santa Fe, that's where Santa Fe would get the gross receipts tax for basically an oil well if I'm an engineer working in Santa Fe. Is that Is that jive, or is that something that we need to do some more study? Maybe
think-
get somebody in here to talk about some of those niceties at some point.
I
So,
think the ins and outs of this may need to be looked at by a guy like a Richard Anklum with the New Mexico Tax Research Institute. This is maybe one level above us in the Knights Templar. Level.
Well, I had to figure this out for myself, and mostly I was like, everything I do, even though it benefits many parts of the state, sometimes beyond Albuquerque, the way I analyzed it with my CPA is like, I do the work. If I'm in Albuquerque doing the work, then that's where the gross receipts tax stays. So,
well, and this was all done, of course, as a fix, if you will, so the state could tap into those funds from online retailers, including Amazon and others, because not to get too far into the weeds on this, but prior to that move by the state, it was not that the states were prohibited from taxing internet sales, but the idea was you can't tax people who have no tangible presence in your state, in your jurisdiction. So if somebody's buying a microphone, if you will, from a provider on Amazon who's in Maine, there's no tangible connection there, and the state of New Mexico can't come after that.
They call that, Alex, what is nexus? I mean, they call that nexus. It's a fancy word, but that's what you're describing. There is this nexus thing. And so in addition to that kind of internet swirling around, we still have the issue about people do a lot of things without nexus to New Mexico. And it's, I hear this in Santa Fe all the time. It's like, oh, these guys, these service providers are just across the Texas line are doing things, and it's 7%, 8% cheaper, so we're going with them instead of the New Mexico company to do things. So, yes, there are a lot of layers to this gross receipts tax thing, and I think it would be interesting. Now, maybe it'll put people to sleep, and they'll go crashing into the guardrails if they're listening to this in their cars. But it is really an important thing for New Mexico, and you nailed it. There's going to be a lot of hesitancy because the last time they came up with the brilliant idea themselves, it certainly was not what they expected.
Yeah, so very complicated, and I specifically brought up this issue, and it was kind of one of those deals where I think the mayor was just being nice. I was speaking to the Republican group. He's a Republican. They said, hey, Paul Gessing's in town from Rio Grande Foundation. They were very appreciative of the articles I write that also run down in the Carlsbad newspaper. And, I was starting to talk to the staff, and I said, after pleasantries were exchanged, I said, I really want to figure out what we can do about this gross receipts tax issue. And that was when the staff started waving their hands.
We've got ideas.
This is not, we don't want to have, all this very tricky and difficult discussion happening right now. We want to just have a social call. And it was very nice. The mayor of Carlsbad was a wonderful person. And we had a very, I think, honest and candid conversation, because ultimately it is not in the interests of us at the Rio Grande Foundation or anybody to kind of come after the revenue situation for some of these smaller, more fiscally conservative cities like Carlsbad that are governed much better than, say, Albuquerque. But, we want to do something, whatever it takes within reason, to remove obstacles to gross receipts tax reform. And unfortunately, this is one of them. This is probably the biggest obstacle at this point.
Yeah, and to reiterate your point, on the taking the tax off the food, they initially had the hold harmless, where you can trust us in Santa Fe to do the right thing, and then the Santa Fe did the right thing until it got too expensive, and they're like, okay, now you're on your own, and you can raise your own taxes. Well, if you don't have a tax base and you're not selling anything in your rural New Mexico county, really, what does changing the tax rate do? And that really did hurt a lot of those small counties and continues to hurt them to this day.
Yeah, and it just further highlights that the gross receipts tax is a unholy mess. It is a problematic tax structure, and that is an inherent situation, something that you shouldn't have a my kids and I and my wife, we like to play Jenga occasionally. Jenga is not a good tax code model. It's something that is obviously unstable, unsteady, and ill-conceived, and it's something that we need to put a more thoughtful approach into, and we'll continue working in this direction, though. So, speaking of bad policies, yes, we are finally seeing movement at Spaceport America in terms of private launches. The first official tourist launch is supposed to happen here in August at Virgin Galactic's, from Virgin Galactic's spaceport and space facility that is put there by New Mexico taxpayers and paid for by the taxpayers. Well, wouldn't you know it, just as we're starting to get things off the ground, Spaceport America is in need of millions of dollars in repairs and improvements. I know this is a huge shock. Now, real quickly, the facility is reported as being a $225 million facility. In reality, the facility, as of a count I made a year or two ago, has really cost $275 or so million due to other improvements. But now, the facility, which was constructed starting in 2009, is in need of repairs. The roof is, according to Source New Mexico, in need of repairs that could range from $800,000 to $3 million, depending on how aggressively they want to, whether we're patching or doing a full replace on the roof. There also are issues with the water treatment, and that's damaging the pipes. They need to remove some of the hard water, and that's going to cost money. That'll just be added in, kind of amortized with the utility costs. Finally, a new 30,000 square foot building is supposedly needed that will include staff offices, conference rooms, an auditorium, cafeteria, dining area, and server storage. That would cost $45 million to $60 million and put the overall facility closer to $350 million in its total costs. And that's not including the taxes that are paid by the local counties that down there that contribute to the upkeep of the facility as well. So there is a lot of money that goes into this spaceport. And again, as has been the case, I think, to quote Beauty and the Beast, tale as old as time, this is the New Mexico way to take money out of its productive oil and gas industry and dump it into unproductive sectors of the economy, whether it's film or spaceport. And, we hope, like everybody else, that the spaceport does get the ball rolling here. I think the question would be, if I was a policymaker asked to vote on this, am I really going to allocate between 45 and 60 million additional dollars for a new facility when we are just finally getting started after a decade plus with tourism, manned space launches, the actual mission that this facility was meant to undertake? And, my answer to that is no, but we don't know. So anyway, that's where things stand.
Yes, and good job, Virgin Galactic. You've done a space flight, but right now their plan is to just do one per month. That's not a whole lot of them at this point. And, I do know they have plans to be able to get to one per week and maybe even more frequently than that. But all of that to just say that the business model of the anchor tenant down there is not necessarily secured at this point in time. It's like, and again, I wish them every success in doing what they're doing, but they still have some hurdles to overcome to turn that thing into a sustainable operation.
Yeah, it's hard to, I don't know, argue, in my opinion, if you're being rational as a legislator, that you would want to pour more money into the facility before they kind of prove out their business model. They've managed to get to space on a semi kind of sort of regular schedule. They just are not ready to get into space as quickly as is needed for them to make this a viable business operation. So I would kind of take a little bit more of a wait and see approach. But this legislature tends to operate like they've got a hole in their pocket when it comes to the financial resources of New Mexico.
And thanks to oil and gas, they kind of do.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
and now, having said that, it's money poorly spent is not what we're advocating. But there are a lot of resources that you can do a lot of crazy things in Santa Fe.
Yeah,
so.
until the voters of New Mexico say, I think we should be the beneficiaries of this oil and gas boom, not pick a special interest group out of the hat and dump the taxpayer dollars into it. We should be saying our tax rates, our tax burdens, our business environment, all of those should be much better and much improved. But speaking of wasteful government spending, Wally, coming here to the Albuquerque area, city of Albuquerque government, we've criticized the rail runner. We've criticized the spaceport. We've criticized money for Eclipse Aviation. We've
ART.
The computer that Richardson bought. Abortion clinic on the state border with Texas. This governor pushed, but this may be the boondoggle to end all boondoggles in the state of New Mexico, specifically the city of Albuquerque. Now, this is all coming from a KOB TV story dated July 22nd. City leader unveils plans for rail trail project in Albuquerque. Now, reading the story, you are led to discover that the city is planning to build a 7-mile bike trail that, when all is said and done, will cost $80 million. 80. That is with a specially made tumbleweed design thing, for lack of a better word, art project, I guess, by a well-known architect named Antoine Predock. This rail trail is going to connect the Albuquerque rail yards, which is Tim Keller's favorite place in the entire city of Albuquerque or anywhere nearby. There's no determined plans. They've only got $40 million so far, which they say is halfway to where they need to be. It is an absolute debacle, and I expect fully that this project will further increase in price. I was busy online as I saw this and was writing a post on this particular issue, looking for things in the highway construction area that might be more worthy. And I remember that a year ago, there was a story in the Albuquerque Journal about a bridge. If you're heading south on I-25 out of Albuquerque, it's just past Isleta, and you cross back over the Rio Grande. This bridge is in serious disrepair. The Albuquerque Journal story shows these massive cracks and kind of rigging of the bridge in order to make it viable. They signed $1 million contract just to keep the thing standing. This is a bridge used by 35,000 vehicles every day that would cost $78 million. Now, I am well aware that this is a largely state-funded, maybe federal project, but, money is money, and I'm just trying to compare what we're looking at with this wonderful 7-mile bike trail. I use that advisedly, for $80 million that we could instead be doing things like shoring up absolutely essential infrastructure. And as you and I have talked about, Wally, it's not just that particular bridge that is in desperate need of repair. There are roads throughout the state where they resemble washboards more than they resemble well-paved roads. And that $80 million would go a long way. And with the final note on my part is that the city has repeatedly failed to clear homeless and keep the existing bike network of trails well maintained. There are trails that consistently have tents and homeless running around and causing a bunch of problems with those trails. It makes me wonder if at some point this particular the Cadillac of bike trails will succumb to the same fate. It's just, I saw it, the more I read, the more I thought, holy cow, I cannot believe that this mayor of the city is looking to do something like this.
Well, first of all, Paul, how do you spend that much money per mile of a bike trail? It's now I can see that for a new 4-lane highway, you know what I mean? And but a bike and walking trail, I'm not sure how all of that adds up. And yes, to your point, it calls to mind, Paul, my first ride on the Rail Runner. It's like I rode the Rail Runner early in its career, and I was looking at it from the eyes of a tourist. And back then, this was certainly before we had the homeless problem and the issues that we have today. But I counted 13 mattresses along the side of the road in between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And believe me, the issues with trash, with crime, with homelessness is this something that's even going to come anywhere close to achieving the goals it's going to achieve? And I'm not sure exactly why you would want, a bike trail right next to the railroad anyway. You know what I'm saying? It's like I would say that the bike trail along the Rio Grande, I think that's a fantastic resource. I think that's great. But I don't think that costs millions and millions of dollars per mile to build either. I think it was, maybe tens of thousands per mile. So I'm not sure what makes this project different, but it'll be interesting to see these plans as they roll out.
Well, here are a few hints. So one is world-renowned architect Antoine Predock unveiled his design for the project Saturday, including new plazas, landmarks, and overall layout. We've identified 11 different auras, or kind of historical areas along the trail areas that have a history that we can talk about, said Terry Bruner, director of the Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency. Each of these areas will include certain attractions like the Neon Tumbleweed or Enchantment Plaza, but most of these will come later. And then they're also saying that the central crossing will be at grade with ramps at Central to eliminate the dangerous underpass that we have for pedestrians. Of course, the dangerous underpass only became dangerous when they let the homeless problem get out of control.
That is exactly right. I think that underpass there at Central is actually a very cool thing. And back in the day, there used to be the odd person. I used to work downtown and would walk across that, fairly regularly. It's kind of a cool place, but not if there are people lurking there or living there. Much worse.
Yeah. So I don't know. We may have hit peak boondoggle here, but and by the way, the sources are federal, state, and local. So all major governing entities have their hand in this illustrious pie, which is kind of the way you expect it, because rarely do true boondoggles get their genesis from simply local money. It typically takes a nice little pot of wasteful spending coming from Washington D.C. The what do they call that when the
mothership of all wasteful spending?
Well, yeah, but the gateway drug, if you will.
Okay,
they're kind of, the federal government's like the drug dealer out on the corner handing, hey, I'll give you $5 if you go do something really stupid here, like hit your head on a wall. They maybe another few people come around and say, well, we'll get you $50 if you hit your head on the wall. But the federal government's the one with that initial $5 buy-in that they're so good at. All right. Speaking of the federal government, just yesterday, the U.S. Forest Service admitted, after months of delay, that it caused yet another of the big forest fires last summer. This one was the Cerro Pelado. They've already admitted that they caused the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fires, but Cerro Pelado occurred in the Jemez Mountains in the Santa Fe National Forest and burned 45,600 acres. And it was another prescribed burn that they didn't know what they were doing, apparently, or ignored what they were doing, and it got out of control. And kind of the only point I'll have on this, aside from that the Forest Service really, really stinks at its job, is that they stink at their job because, in part, they are not, these are not the people living in our communities. These are federal officials who are taking their marching orders from Washington, D.C., the environmental groups up there. They're not managing the land effectively, whether it's timber or thinning or whatever it may be. They just do a poor job. They don't really have the incentive to do a great job. And this kind of thing will continue until the Forest Service abdicates its control over these lands. And the ideal would be to privatize some of these lands. The compromise we came up with a decade ago, and Representative Harrell was involved with when she was a state rep, not a federal rep, was to have the state of New Mexico take over management of some of these lands. At least the state of New Mexico is local. It is the people affected by what happens on those lands, and there would be a financial incentive for the state to do a better job, not just by preventing the fires, but also managing other resources available on those lands more effectively, and perhaps using those dollars then directly to improve the management of those lands. So we have talked about this. There's a link at Heirs of Enchantment in the article, but I guess the good news is that the federal government came clean, Forest Service came clean, but the bad news is 3 of the worst fires in New Mexico history in one summer, thanks to federal mismanagement and incompetence. It's enough to make even Martin Heinrich criticize federal management.
Oh no, let's not go that far. So what would I remember the Smokey the Bear song, and then you have the Smokey Bear. The federal government took the out of it, and they spent a lot of money actually branding to say it's not Smokey the Bear, it's Smokey Bear. But Smokey Bear fire commercials, what would those look like today? It's like, if you see a Forest Service employee out in the forest, report them, because they're the biggest danger to fire right now. It's not been a good track record. No one thinks it's a good track record. And it's crazy what happens. And, you still see control burns in the spring, where just being a New Mexican that's been around, and it's like, do they really think they're going to get 2 weeks without wind this time of the spring? They've had lots of problems, and then get just another one on the list. So, and then, heck, let's not even go back a few years to Los Alamos fire and all of that summer that was a disaster from quote unquote beginning to be controlled burns that turned uncontrolled.
Well, Smokey Bear, of course, is from New Mexico, and
I still call him Smokey the Bear. Hopefully, that's not considered a hate crime or anything. But it's a good story. It's a heartwarming story. I thought it was kind of good. It's like, no one should throw unlit cigarettes or lit cigarettes, out in the forest. Certainly, you should put your campfires out. All of that's good stuff, but right. It kind of pales to what the powers that be have done from a fire point of view here in our state. It's amazing.
Yeah, and the idea has to be management of those forests, and the idea of prescribed burns is not an entirely bad one, but they need to be a heck of a lot more careful. And obviously, thinning and managing the forest is a critical component of that. It goes back to the Native Americans who once, controlled all this land and managed it themselves as well. And yes, the natives did manage it, and they still do manage their own lands. And those forests tend to be much more healthy and much thinner in their approach. They've done the work to prevent some of these horrendous fires from getting out of control. But it's just another case of bad incentives, federal governments not being effective at doing what they are supposed to do, which is to keep the land healthy and prevent big disasters like this one from happening. But
as opposed to facilitate them.
Yeah, yeah. So one quick news story here that we talked about New Mexico's latest billionaire, or first billionaire ever. But I was somewhat surprised to read a report that found that New Mexico was a good place to be born if you want to be a billionaire. The person that everybody knows, maybe not everybody, but if you listen to this podcast, you know that Jeff Bezos was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's, of course, one of the very richest people on the entire planet. Did not start his company, did not go into business in New Mexico. I think he only lived here as a child, but he was technically born in Albuquerque, and that is something we can all kind of acknowledge. Of course, Bill Gates, who's number 3 on the richest list, famously founded Microsoft in Albuquerque, but he was not born here, so he doesn't factor into this. But Wally, I don't know how much reading ahead you've done on this. Of course, you can, as well as everybody, on heirsofenchantment.com. I was surprised to see that we're one of the 10 states, the 10 best states to be from, as ranked by billionaires born in the state as a percentage of the population. It's a very small portion of the population, but we have a good number of people who are billionaires, in addition to Jeff Bezos, who are from here. Dan Kurzius, Kurzius. You probably use his product, or at least click on his product every single day, Wally. Do you know what product that is?
No, what is it, Paul?
MailChimp.
Oh, okay. There you go. Yes.
Yeah, from Albuquerque.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so I don't know where he went off to. I'm sure the Bay Area probably. Ernest Garcia II. He is from Gallup and became a billionaire. He founded Drive Time, which is a car selling joint.
Yep.
And more famously, even my kids always love these whenever we go to the big city, Carvana. Because those towers they have, it just seems like so cool.
The vending machine.
Yeah, getting a car out of a vending machine really makes my kids excited. So that is Ernest Garcia II of Gallup, also a billionaire. And then kind of coming full circle, and after a billionaire not born here, but who is the first billionaire from New Mexico, who founded a solar company. And then we've got these MailChimp and Drive Time, and Paul Foster from Lovington, New Mexico, Western Refining. So that's kind of the one that we all would expect to be a New Mexico billionaire from the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, that's the one that you might have seen coming. So
yeah. So anyway, I just was very fascinated and interested to see this particular list. Real quickly, since we've had so much to talk about, pretty crazy for mid-July here, when theoretically we're in the dog days of summer. Rio Grande Foundation co-signed a letter, drafted actually comments on the issue of the dishwashers. Biden administration, of the many things that they are trying to take away from us, is working dishwashers. They want to reduce the amount of energy and water efficiency, water used in dishwashers, in a new proposed regulation. Rio Grande Foundation commented against the federal proposed regulations of the Biden administration. In my family, I can assure you that we already have that there's clean, there's dirty, and then there's been washed but still dirty dishes. Even
Yeah.
in the current scenario, dishwashers are just one of many appliances that, thanks to federal regulations, often are not as effective as they could and should be or were 20 years ago. And this is a regulation that's going to make even more of a problem for people when they wash their dishes and try to get them clean. So,
Yeah, and Paul, just real quickly, I love this topic. I don't love that it's happening, but I had a generation of a dishwasher about 20 years ago before the current regulations came in. That thing was awesome. It had basically a grinder, a garbage disposal. It was powerful. You could take the dirtiest dishes, throw them in there. And so guess what? The amount of water we used rinsing and, pre-rinsing and all
Yep.
of that, zero. So did that dishwasher use a little more water? I know it did. I absolutely know it did. But on a total water usage now with the newer generation, man, you just waste a lot of, or not waste, you have to use a lot
Right.
of water to get the dishwasher to work. You have to pre-wash them before you wash them. Will they ever do any, like consumer economics type studies where they measure the water between these new standards and not? Oh no, because they know better. They know what they want to accomplish. They're just going to throw this in. This will be, I think, let's call it Obamacare for dishes. It's like we have the plan. We're going to roll it out all across the country. We're not going to do any pre-studies. We'll do no pilots. We won't analyze what works and what doesn't. We'll just throw it in there because we know it's the right thing to do, Paul.
yeah, I hate to break this to you, Wally, but I don't think they care.
I know they don't care.
I'm going to use the whispering thing that Biden used. They don't care.
Are they ignorant or apathetic? They don't know and they don't care.
I was quoted in a excellent article by a new-ish online education news site called The Lion. It is READ lion.com. Again, you can find this story on the Heirs of Enchantment site. It's titled "Rearranging Deck Chairs on the Titanic." New Mexico governor announces $100 million for pre-K, ignoring experts who say it won't help. I was one of many people quoted in this article saying, for example, the state of New Mexico does such a great job with its K-12 system. Maybe we should try to figure that out before we dump a bunch of money into 3- and 4-year-olds and putting them in school. And just, what are we dealing with here with the actual data showing that preschool probably is not a very effective policy in terms of double-blind studies and actual real-world experience. Yet again, just like the dishwashers, ironically, and not to compare my children or anybody else's children to dishwashers, but there's a ideological approach saying, "Oh, we're going to expand this system, and you're all going to pay for it, and we don't care whether you really like it or it's actually beneficial." That is the approach that government seems to use, whether it's state government or, in this case, in the federal government in the previous case. So, just the way it is, and what we have to deal with. So,
yeah, just a quick shout out to Ronald Reagan. The scariest words in the English languages were from the government, and we're here to help. Man, we are seeing that in a lot of places here in New Mexico and across the U.S. right now.
finally, we have a luncheon on August 8th. Brian Dimitrovic of the Laffer Center. That's the Arthur Laffer Center. We will be having a luncheon with him. And tickets are available for sale at heirsofenchantment.com or riograndefoundation.org. Buy them today. And Mr. Dimitrovic was a guest on this show, and really interesting history of taxation. Taxes have consequences, and they certainly do, as our discussion of Texas kind of revealed. Not just, if you're listening to this show, you know that taxes have consequences, but we discussed it at length last week.
And if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that I usually say Laffer curve before you do, so congratulations. So,
Yep. All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.